Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us today at the Responsible Computing Self-Assessment Survey webinar. Joining us today, we have the working group chairs of Responsible Computing who have been instrumental in making this work happen. So joining us today, we have Cheranellore Vasu Devan, I think I have it, who we refer to as Vasu from IBM. We have Dave Graham from Dell, John Easton, IBM, myself with OMG, so I'm Michael Linehan, with OMG, which is the parent company that manages responsible computing. We have Oriette Nayel from IBM and also Petrena Prince from IBM. We'll begin proceedings with Petrena, who's going to detail how this model came to be in the first place. Then we're going to go through each one of the domains that you see listed here, starting with data center, ending with impact. We're going to have 5 minutes for each domain, and we're going to go through the content that's contained within the survey within each one of these 6 domains. So if you do have a question, please leave it for the end. So we'll provide 15 minutes for Q&A right at the end. And just prior to the Q&A, I'm going to give a little bit of detail as well on the future plans of the maturity model beyond the survey. So without further ado, Petrena, do you want to take it away with the history of the survey?
Super, thank you very much. Hi everyone, I'm Petrena Prince. I'm a sustainability manager in IBM Global Real Estate. But I've been working on responsible computing for about 2 years now, so I'm absolutely delighted to give you an introduction into responsible computing and to kick off the self-assessment webinar. So what is responsible computing? Well, responsible computing is a systemic approach to the modern day challenges in IT, including sustainability, ethics, and professionalism. It came about actually from surveys of CTOs that were done in 2019. We interviewed over 120 CTOs, and although it was on architecture decision points, it turned out that many of the CTOs had anxieties around ESG topic areas. So an initiative was started called Responsible Computing to try and distill those concerns and to see what IBM could do to help the CTOs. And initially a framework was produced, which you can see in the top right-hand corner, which was a ladder type idea of where you need to get your resources in place first and then create your infrastructure and then create your code. But we created a client council with 5 clients from 5 different industries. And what became really apparent was these topics actually all overlap, and you have to take a systemic, holistic approach to your IT project. So what you do in one area will affect another area, and hence we move to the hexagons of hexagons shown down in the bottom. Now, this is a great way to be able to see how an IT project will impact across the enterprise, and it's easy for technical people to understand and also not so technical people to understand. So just to quickly go through it, and I will be quick because we will go through this in the self-assessment, but just to set the scene in case this is brand new to you, the responsible data center, this is actually about the building, this is about the facility. So this is what's going into the data center, such as the green energy and the water usage and what's coming out, the heat and any waste produced. Responsible infrastructure, this is about compute, storage and networking, and this could be in the data center or in manufacturing, or it could be on the edge. But here this is us looking at your carbon footprint of your technology. Now you may want to move to more newer machines which are more efficient, and then you need to think about the societal side about how do you reuse and recycle the equipment that you're disposing of. Then going on to responsible code, this takes in conscious code choices. So this is for your developers. This is for them to think about, are they using the right programming language? Are they taking advantage of the way they work? Are they in DevOps teams? Are they using containers and microservices and using the cloud? Also, are they using the right data sets? Could they, if they're AI, could they be using actually smaller data sets and still getting the same results? Through to societal again of, you know, are the teams diverse? We don't want to introduce unconscious bias into coding, which might take years to fix. And then moving on to the left-hand side, we have data usage, which is to do with data collection, data governance, and data security. And then systems, this is our interactions with computers, humans interacting with computers. So this could be AI related, but it could be anything. We all want to know when we log on to a computer that our data is being held securely and being used for good reasons. And that leads us into the impact domain. So the impact domain is about how are we showing what we're doing that is good. Maybe this is through ESG reporting, or just in general showing that we're doing initiatives that are good examples of technology for societal gain. And we donated this framework along with the values and principles and also the self-assessment model to OMG to start the consortium. We're absolutely delighted to be a founding member of Responsible Computing alongside with Dell. And we have other partners such as academic partners, such as the University of Edinburgh, Purdue University and the British Computer Society, just to name a few. And the self-assessment has already changed from when we donated it from the consortium. The consortium has already influenced what we see here. And how it will work is for those 6 areas, there are questions which are easy to answer. Some are single choice answers and some are multiple choice. Some are weighted. And at the end of the assessment, you get given a score. And this score is really useful. It can help see where you are as a responsible computing provider. And it can help you decide which areas you might want to focus on your roadmap to sustainability. It also comes with helpful recommendations, and also it allows you to have the foundation to be able to redo this survey at different times to see how you're progressing. It's free. It's on the Responsible Computing website, responsiblecomputing.net, under resources, or you can get it through this URL. You know, go on, have a try of the assessment. We'd be love to hear how you find it. Okay, and with that, I will pass on to John.
Thanks very much, Petrena. And if you think back to that sort of hexagon of hexagons that Petrena mentioned, you know, the one that was sitting at the top was that for what we call responsible data centers. And really here we are concerned not just with the data center, but with any set of facilities that an organization is going to need in order to host and run the servers, the storage, the networking that we will talk about in a little bit more detail when we get to responsible infrastructure next. Now, I'm sure you're well aware that there is a lot of work that's already been done in this space. But it is interesting if you look at a lot of the press that's been sort of circulating just over the past couple of months, it still seems that we have quite a lot of work to do. And so what we've tried to do with the Responsible Data Center set of activities is really to look at a number of those large areas to do with, you know, how you are both consuming energy and then what you potentially might be doing with it. So it could be that we're talking about the use of green energy. So, you know, if you have energy coming from a carbon neutral source, obviously that is going to be better from a responsible data center perspective than coming from carbon-based fuels, you know. But just as we think about the energy to power the servers, we need to be thinking about the energy that is used to potentially cool the data center. And some of the technologies and techniques that might be used, liquid cooling, for example, that make the cooling of the data center as efficient as it can be. And then if we think about the heat that we're generating, what are we potentially doing with that heat as we go forwards? You know, because there are numbers of data centers which are taking that heat and then maybe feeding that into community heating projects, which is always an attractive way of doing it. And then last but not least, you know, data centers are not necessarily, you know, renowned for their, you know, green credentials in the past, but we think now about how we might make these things more sustainable going forward. So on the infrastructure side, we already think about, the removal of hazardous substances from the servers, the storage, the networking. What we then need to be thinking about is how do we take those things forward, and how do we remove or reduce the usage of some of those materials as we go forwards. And then last but not least, as we think about the facilities that the organization has in place within their data centers today, or potentially within the data centers of those cloud providers or hosting providers that they might be using instead, when those data centers themselves come up for renewal, are there alternatives that we might then need to consider in order to make the next data center a better choice, a more sustainable choice, a more responsible choice than the one that we have today? So continuing around the hexagon of hexagons, I want to take us on to responsible infrastructure. And as we said before, this is really now concerned about the servers, the storage and networking that are going to actually be running those workloads. And I think a couple of the key things that we need to be thinking about here is not just the day-to-day running requirements. So obviously these things consume power. Power is provided from the data center that we just talked about. And so we want to be moving to more and more efficient technologies over time. But as I said, we also need to be thinking about the end-to-end supply chain here. Where are those servers coming from? Storage, networking, equally. What are we going to do with them? How long are we going to run them for? And what happens at the end? How are we going to make sure that as and when those things are disposed of at the end of their useful lifetime, can we reuse them? Can we donate them to some other organization, maybe for charitable purposes? If we are going to be destroying them, then are we doing that in a way that encourages the sort of reclamation of the precious metals and the like, which are present in those server storage and networking devices? Of course, when we're running infrastructure, we need to not only think about the infrastructure itself and its running costs, but how efficient is the usage of that. So we want to be looking at techniques to drive up the consumption of that resource that we've got available, make the most out of the compute power, the storage, the networking bandwidth, etc., that we have available to us, rather than running things in an underutilized fashion. We want to be thinking about how we schedule workloads to make sure that we are maximizing the usage of the capacity that we have, and making sure that, at the same time, we're continuing to deliver the sort of resilience and reliance on the components that we have. Now, so we need to be thinking about, how we going to acquire these technologies. If we're going to a hosting provider, what are their supply chain policies? How do we manage these things? And not only how do we manage the infrastructure, but what about the people that are managing these things? And then, as I said at the end, what do we do at the end? Now, obviously, we don't run infrastructure for the sake of running infrastructure. We run infrastructure for the sake of running applications. And so what I'd like to do now is hand over to Vasu, who will start talking to us about responsible code.
Well, thank you, John. So I'm glad to talk about responsible code. Traditionally, when we started developing software programs, we were focusing on the functions, its correctness, and then also to some extent how it performs. But I think of late, there is a need for being more conscious about how we are developing this code. How equitable is this code in terms of, let's say, accessibility to all different kinds of people, of different languages, different locale, different units of measurements, and all those things. Is it affordable by a large cross-section of the users. Is it ethical in terms of its application and in terms of the way it was developed? Is it unbiased in terms of the results it produces, as well as the way it was again sourced? What is the resource consumption? How much the time and cost and then power that's needed to really run that code to have your application working properly. And it's how it's performing in terms of its reliability, as well as how secure it is, how safe it is to use. So these are some of the considerations which we need to take care when we are developing the code, as well as when we are buying and using that code itself. And equally important are the transparencies the owners or the developers or the providers supply for that piece of code. What are the limitations? They should be able to. They should document what are the limitations of, in terms of functions and performance of the code, and what is really intended for it to be used, whether it is being used correctly, and also what is the long-term support, whether it's something that is working today, may not be supported tomorrow. All these are part of the responsible code development process. And also about the traceability and ownership, who developed it and how it was developed and how it was supplied and who owns that. All those factors are very, very important to really, not only in development of the code as a supplier, but also as a user too, when we are sourcing that software for our use. So this set of questionnaire, I'm not planning to read through. So basically again, some of the things I already talked about, how you would describe the software development process. Are you transparent in describing how you are developing, what qualified developers you have, and what kind of equity in the whole process from beginning to end? What kind of tools you have used to develop the code? Is it something which is more proprietary versus something which is more open? Something that really makes sure that it can be run on multiple platforms, multiple browsers, and there are different things which you need to really take care when you are looking at when you're talking about the openness of the code itself. So it's always all the way from, sorry, let me just flip this one. Just want to make sure I have the right code here. So this is the next section. So basically, what I'm trying to do here would be to, it's all the way from when you do the development, code development, how do we collect the data, how do we govern the data, as well as how do we really make use of the data itself to develop the code. The questionnaire design here are aimed at helping to assess how each of the user groups faring in producing and supporting the responsible code, and how to improve or close the gaps, if any. This is our first release, and definitely we need your feedback and suggestions to improve that metrics and the maturity level definitions, and then also the way we are the way this whole assessment levels can be implemented. Thank you, and I hand over to.
Thank you. I'm Oriette Nayel. I'm a Principal Project Executive at IBM, and I'm going to take you through the responsible data usage. Mainly, responsible data usage is about unlocking the full value of data throughout its life cycle to deploy efficient solutions that are transparent, fair, and show respect between people. And when we refer to the self-assessment for data usage, its primary objective is to support organizations to discover the gaps to be bridged and to provide respective recommendations to establish a strong data foundation that can act as a basis for a sustainable service provider. This data foundation should clearly identify the required data, how it is collected, how it is stored, accessed, connected, and exchanged with third parties, acting as a base for informed decisions and for efficient and scalable solutions and applications. The recommendations are based on the current data usage practices that come out from the assessment. Examples could be developing policies and procedures to ensure data correctness and availability, could be identifying rules for ensuring who may access the data for the stated purpose only. It could be identifying periodic purging of non-relevant data, and ensuring that the purging is done based on the rules, could be reducing storage through accessing or through using third-party data sources rather than holding large volumes of unneeded data in-house. So the assessment questions, they cover mainly three phases: the data collection phase, the data governance, and the data usage phase. In terms of data collection, the assessment questions cover regulations for data collections that might be there in place, procedures for retention of the collected data, and controls for the data exchange with third parties. In terms of data governance, for the collected data, the assessment questions go over procedures for the data classification, for the data ownership, for deletion, backup, recovery, as well as measurements in place for maintaining the cleanliness and the safety of the data. And for the data usage, assessment questions cover regulations for data privacy, access management, procedures for security breaches, and transparency for the AI datasets. By covering the data throughout its life cycle, the self-assessment can be a catalyst to accelerate the sustainability goals of individual organizations and to support their business growth. This is just a quick summary of what the questions may cover, but of course, when you go over the questions, you will be able to find more recommendations with all the other domains. And now I hand over to my colleague, Dave Graham, to walk you through the systems domain. Thank you.
Thanks, Oriette. My name is Dave Graham. I'm a research technologist and technology advocate for Dell Technologies Office of the CTO. So a little bit about what we focus on within the responsible computing systems space is really what was alluded to at the very beginning by Petrena Prince. It's this idea of connection between all these individual variables, how they all tie together, what connects them, what's the ligature, what's the kind of ideologies that bring everything together. We have infrastructure and data center and code and data usage and privacy and governance, and then obviously the ongoing social impact of things. So what we're really interested in understanding is how all these disparate parts come together and how they create inclusive systems. And this relates to how we create software that does not marginalize certain communities or people groups, how we create open and accessible, it's the open part of OpenAI, for example. How do we create open systems that allow us to understand what is being processed, how it's being processed? And like Oriette was just talking about, what are the controls and structures in place to ensure that that continues to be maintained long-term within our organizations? So again, part of this is understanding what artificial intelligence does, what it is, how it gets used. Obviously, currently, we're looking at these various systems like ChatGPT or large language models. How do you explain that? How do you ensure transparency through those processes? Where the data is coming from, how it's being connected, who it's drawing from, who it's impacting. The other thing is the idea behind accessibility and internationalization. We are a global citizenship, a global digital citizenship, regardless of everything that we, countries that we reside in. So there's this understanding of connection and process-oriented development, which says, I am not just where I'm sitting currently today in America. I'm not just American. I need to design this for an audience that's around the world. And how do these, do these different pieces and applications fit together in order to achieve that end? The third and probably the most critical part, as what we're seeing now, is the compliance to standards. And these are developing standards. What we have seen in the market is obviously the generation of reactive type standards. We see a problem and then we create policy and process around it. But also trying to understand where we can feed and help create usable standards within the technology domains. So all of these kind of come together. So as part of this, the assessment, what we're looking at is IT system development and design. Again, where do we start from and how are we going to continue from there? We look at the governance and ethics around what we're doing. Should we be doing this? Should we be implementing these systems in the way that we have been implementing them? And if not, are there better ways of doing this to make sure that we don't run afoul of any kind of CSR or ESG protocols within our organizations, and then also within the nationalities and nation states that we operate within around the world. the third component here is what we look at in terms of the user interface, or the system's usage. Who's using it? How are they using it? And what's the ultimate output of that? So ensuring that, like the responsible code, like Vasu talked about with responsible code, ensuring that everything we do is explainable, is understandable, and that that the folks that are using it, the people that are using it, are able to adequately understand the implications of this type of software, the type of software developed, or the infrastructure that operates within. And last but not least, we look at system performance and maintenance. Again, I always look at systems as kind of this meta roll-up of everything else that's in this place, even including impact, which Petrena is going to talk about in just a second. But how do we look at things holistically? How do we look at the usage of water within infrastructure and how it applies to data center? How do we look at supply chain, and how does supply chain impact data center, code shipping, artificial intelligence, data usage, and so on and so forth? So it's not an insurmountable task, and it's not an insurmountable assessment, but it is definitely a starting space that we want to begin to look at and start to develop a rubric or framework around that says, how can we do things better? How can we benefit humanity in the same way that we would like to be benefited? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Petrena to talk a little bit about impact.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve, that was wonderful. It's really important that we publicize the good tech that's happening out there and make sure that we're removing any bad tech. If we look at what we've seen in the newspapers over the last few years, there's been a lot of negative press about IT. So we have, for example, when we think about energy, people think about Bitcoin and how much energy it uses. It could be the same usage as a small country, such as Finland or Iceland, or even half of that of the UK. So, we think about energy and try and put that into something that you can maybe imagine. 57 million tons of carbon dioxide from Bitcoin, which we would need to plant 300 million trees to offset. So that's a big impact. Worldwide, there are 7,000 data centers, and depending on which reports you read, currently they reckon about 3% of the world's energy is used by data centers, and that could be anywhere between 11 and 30% by 2030. So this isn't sustainable, and also data centers use a lot of water, 3 to 5 million gallons of water a day. That's the same as a town of 30 to 50,000 people. So we need to address this and see how do we be more responsible and sustainable. If we think about the environment and the e-waste that's generated, they reckon there's 50 million tons of e-waste every year. So again, if you like to put that into images, that would be the equivalent of one laptop being thrown out every second. And of course, e-waste contains a lot of rare metals, which are often can be toxic, and if that leaches into the groundwater, that could be bad for local animals and biodiversity, as well as might impact humans as well. So, and then lastly, another example of where we need to think about the AI. There was outrage in the UK during COVID when some students didn't get their university places because the AI algorithm decided that their grades weren't going to be good enough based on their postcode. So, we need to address that, and this is what the responsible computing framework can do. And by going through the questions in the assessment, that can help you realize which areas you might need to think about differently. So, in the assessment for impact, there are 3 areas that it covers. The first is how you define the purpose of your responsible computing initiative. And this is really important because you need to understand, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of my project? Why am I doing this? Can it be tied into your ESG reporting? Can it be tied into the UN Sustainability Development Goals? Is the work that you're going to be doing auditable? I think with a lot of work that's being done these days, from an ESG point of view, we're seeing the same rigor that we would expect from financial data. So do you have that setup that you can do that? And are you using it for social good? Is the work that you're doing creating a social value? And that leads into the second question. How do you assess the impact of your responsible computing initiative? And in this section, there's questions that will help you understand that better. So, how do you measure? What would be your KPIs? Do you have governance teams in place to review the projects that you're doing from an angle of misuse? Is anybody looking at the projects going, could this technology be misused? This might be something you've not thought about before, and certainly CTOs, that was coming up as one of the anxieties that I mentioned when we were first studying them, doing the surveys. Could it be used in a different way? And if so, how can you prevent that from happening? Also, is the governance team looking at the diversity? I mentioned that before. We need to make sure that we are having teams that represent the populations, and we're not introducing unconscious bias to our IT projects. So that's all great. And then lastly, how do you communicate the impact of your responsible computing initiative? I think there's many studies out there that show that employees are very keen to work for companies that are working in sustainability, and also to attract talent. People are interested to see what you're doing. So by making sure that you can demonstrate that you are a responsible computing provider can help with those two aspects. So you need to think about how are you doing your internal comms, how are you doing your external comms, and how are you coming to your decisions? I think sometimes we have to be responsible and think, what is the best method for the project? And I'll give you one example from IBM here. So when IBM decided to do a transformation within global real estate, and we were looking at which tool will we use to do our energy utility bills, capture our information so that we can help work out our carbon accounting. We actually analysed over 30 tools, and we went for a tool that wasn't an IBM tool because it was the best on the market. And sometimes you just need to have that strength to make those decisions on why you're using certain things. We were actually justified in doing that because a year later, last year, IBM Sustainability Software acquired that product. So you have to do what's right, and you have to be able to account for your decisions. And that, I think, if you do the survey, all of these different areas will help you understand what you should be thinking about when it comes to being a responsible computing provider. So I'm now going to hand back over to Michael to finish off.
Thanks, Petrena. So just taking us to the last two slides, and then we'll be finished. So what we have right now in terms of the survey provides us with a great high-level overview and snapshot within an organization of all the different areas that they need to think of in terms of their ICT infrastructure in being responsible. However, we want to drill down into more specific areas within each domain and get more detailed and convert this initial survey into a maturity model, which is what we're working on right now. So the model itself will provide an iterative roadmap towards complete organizational change, starting with the computing environment. Right now, we're working with Bill Curtis from the Consortium for Information and Software Quality, CISC, who have previously developed such models. If you would like to get involved in creating the self-assessment maturity model and then using it with your own clients, please do check out the Responsible Computing website on joining, because this will be a members-only product. Then the maturity model itself forms part of three interrelated strategic areas within responsible computing, now being the maturity model itself, showcases, and funding. So responsible computing members will be able to demonstrate real-life instances of sustainable technology and promote them to the market via our showcase program. And then those showcases can be benchmarked against the maturity model, and with our assistance can apply for all the various government funding opportunities that are out there right now in the EU, in the US. There's a number of them that have become available this year. So we have a funding expert on board in the consortium, and he will be assisting on any grant applications that any of our members want to pursue. That's everything. I thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much to our speakers, who also I want to thank for doing all the work in making the self-assessment possible and getting it out there to the market. So thank you very much, everyone, and please be sure to head over to responsiblecomputing.net if you'd like to learn more about possibly becoming a member and seeing the publications that we have available right now.